Joining us now is Seth Schachner, Managing Director of Strat Americas. Seth, thank you so much for joining us. We've got this holiday shortened week. Everybody's ready to just go to the pool, the beach, celebrate with a barbecue or fireworks, or maybe sit on the couch and watch some Netflix. All right, so let's talk about Netflix. Look, it's been an outperformer when it comes to this stock, but let's talk about what is behind it. It's got this ad-supported tier that has had more momentum than I think many expected. Talk to us about what you think has been behind the momentum when it comes to this.
Yeah, great to be here, Diane. It's a really remarkable story because I think Netflix, like in the broad picture to me, I'm not sure I use the word conservative, but they've been pretty deliberative about like serving their audience, which is, an online audience, movies, programs, films, all that we know. And not doing too much wild stuff, not going into theaters. And, they're starting to really touch on things now that I think are really continuing to improve their lead and kind of, turbocharging that way out in front of others. And so the advertising piece of it, I think is just really remarkable. It's showing a lot of growth. I think it's outpacing a lot of their competitors in the streaming game. And, it gives consumers another option. They've got multiple pricing legs. So it's a very impressive thing that they're doing with it. And I think that's something that has been, very fundamental to kind of continuing their growth, if you will. They still have, premiums, Squid Game, New Bridgertons, all kinds of kind of quirky and even cheaper documentaries that are out there. And that's still very, very important part of the mix in terms of engaging their customers. And so all that stuff remains pretty strong. I just see them doing things that incrementally advertising, a bit of sports. They're experimenting with events. There's even a new user interface that's got AI and will probably make it easier to discover some of all that content that's in there and maybe a little bit of social activity on it as well. So it's pretty positive stuff from, an entity that might not be the fastest mover in the space, basically. To me, it's a very positive story.
Okay, but one of the things I was thinking about as you were talking, Seth, is I'm like, did Netflix pull the wool over our eyes? They do have great content, but when you think about the ad-supported tier, it just feels kind of cable-like when you think about that. They've got these 94 million monthly active users. That's a big jump year over year. Is that momentum sustainable?
Well, the irony is, if you really look at how the streaming wars kind of exploded and offered all these different choices to consumers, right? And every studio and everyone under the sun from broadcasters jumped in with their own plus versions of streaming services. Right. There's probably too much consumer choice, if you ask me, basically. And where do you spend your money? How do you even find the content? So what I see happening here is a little bit of a rationalization of it, basically. A more rational approach than, for example, what some of the rival studios are doing in Hollywood, who are just cutting spending, laying people off. And, I think the one thing I've also seen here, there's a new deal they announced in France with TF1, I believe, that is kind of like a redistribution or an aggregation strategy, if you will. And that's what Prime has done, actually. If you go to Prime, which also has great engagement, very positive metrics, they got everything under the sun there, from documentaries to BritBox to you name it, basically, quirky rock operas. And I don't know if Netflix is going to push it that far, but I think that they do need to make some steps towards aggregation and giving more choices in there. They've taken tentative steps with video games as well. So I think it's kind of a rational approach that they're taking. They're very, very data-centric, kind of controlled entity. They're not out there doing wild stuff and taking. There have been some bombs in terms of the production spending, but in general, it's a pretty measured strategy.
Seth, you make a great point about the choices, because I feel like when I turn on, for instance, my TV and I'm like, okay, if either I or my son wants to watch something, it's like, okay, which streaming service is it on? You're clicking through all these different apps. I think it's on this one. Let's go here. And then you're trying to find that. Do you see anything about, and do you have any insight on this, any streaming fatigue and what that could mean for Netflix, or do you feel like they're pretty well insulated when it comes to that?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, that problem, I call it discovery. Anyone who's worked in streaming, not just video, audio as well, but there's so much content that's in there. I mean, how do you find it? How do you surface it? And I think the new interface is going to be about that basically. And that's a super key thing. So you can find something like I feel overwhelmed. I might go to the New York Times or something to figure out what I should watch. And then I'll argue about it with the others in the room in terms of what we should watch. But I think there's an attempt to sort of create more discoverability. I mean, what you've seen with, I think more so studios is kind of a paring down of some of the content that's in there, whether that's content spending or big titles, basically. So I think that's something that will bring, some kind of rationality, rational approach to this, basically. Sorry, the second part of your question was, again, I didn't get to answer it, but I had a good one for it.
It's okay. It's okay because I want to get a thought from you because our time is short on, say how Netflix. I know we've got earnings in a couple weeks, so I am curious to know your thoughts on that. But if we can wrap this up, and your thoughts on that and how Netflix versus YouTube, that battle stacks up.
It's the most critical big thing that's in the market right now. And again, this is very, very positive, but I think, I would point to YouTube being, an enormous factor. They call it king of all media now, and you can get anything and everything under the sun there. But I think YouTube has, I guess I'd call it a more refined, cost-oriented content strategy. These influencers that have made, the day for YouTube, whether that's Mr. Beast, Charlie D'Amelio, those are like slightly cheaper, if you will, when you really look at the aggregate numbers than compared to Netflix, which is all about premium content. So, I mean, it would be very interesting to see if Netflix took some steps in that direction and kind of diversified its model towards that. I think that would be very positive as well, because there's got to be content in there they're spending on that it's such an enormous budget that doesn't make sense for them. So maybe you could expect to see a little bit of that as well. But I think the competition between those two is really the biggest. And I think if you're not, with those two or with Prime, you're probably going to see mergers down the line, whether it's Paramount or NBC's Peacock or Max, basically, because there's also RANs.
And all the pluses, like you said. All right, Seth, we'll have to leave our conversation there for today. That's Seth Schachner, Managing Director of Strat Americas. Enjoy your weekend. Enjoy your 4th.